A fixture of BBC television for much of the 1960s, 1970s and the 1980s. You might have seen the news that he's died at the age of 87.
He presented Grandstand, the Sports Review of the Year and the magazine programme Nationwide. He proved a natural fit when the BBC launched its new morning programme, remember it? Breakfast Time in 1983.
Daniela Ralph looks back on his life and career.
He was relaxed and friendly, a favourite uncle, a fixture in the nation's living rooms for over 30 years.
Good evening. This time tomorrow it'll all be over. Will the Grand National throw up yet another moment of drama to be written into the history of the greatest steeplechases of them all?
The temple to the goddess Canon.
His long career started in the 60s. Here he is in Tokyo.
This time stages what must surely be the greatest show on earth with the opening of the 1964 Olympic Games.
He made his career in sport, presenting Match of the Day.
Hello, and our Division 2 match this afternoon, a true top and bottom affair with the home side Leyton Orient, bottom of the second division at the moment, entertaining the visitors from Tyneside Newcastle United. Now the latest score, Manchester United 1, West Ham United 1.
In time, he graduated to presenting the BBC's live sports flagship Grandstand on a Saturday afternoon, where his ability to remain calm, whatever came his way, was especially valuable.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. Well, thank you. I'm losing control of this programme.
He always seemed to have a twinkle in his eye. Here he is with Miss World.
But I'm quite improperly dressed. Everybody here is wearing a black tie and I'm in a lounge suit. Even the cameramen are better dressed than I am.
When Morecambe and Wise gathered top BBC presenters for their 1977 Christmas show, Bough was one of them. It attracted one of the biggest audiences ever on British television.
In the studios, they celebrated.
When the BBC won the race to launch breakfast television, all winning smiles and casual jumpers,
It's 6:30, Monday,
he was the obvious choice to front it.
You're watching the first edition.
A consummate live broadcaster, loved, known and respected by everyone, which just made the News of the World's revelation in May 1988 an even greater bombshell. Frank, the family man, sober and serene, respectable and upright, turned out to be anything but. The embarrassment was heightened by a recent series of the holiday programme, in which his wife Nesta had joined him as they toured Italy.
Well, you've now got me on tenterhooks because I know you've always wanted to come to Siena. Are you disappointed?
The BBC sacked him. He worked elsewhere. Here he is on commercial radio. And they invited him back to the Beeb to reminisce about the 1970s.
And then it was a time that decade when you could get people to say, wow, look at that, you know, because suddenly we had colour. I mean, can you imagine black and white? And people said, wow, colour.
But Frank Bough, the BBC frontman, became a distant memory. There were more tabloid stories, and eventually the work dried up. A sad end for a master of live television.
And we are joined now by Frank's former Breakfast Time co-host Nick Ross and by the presenter Dame Esther Rantzen as well. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us live on BBC Breakfast this morning. Great to talk to you. And Nick, let's come to you first of all because you were there at the start of Breakfast Time alongside Frank. Give us an idea of what he was like and what he brought to that programme.
Good morning. The little summary you've done is actually brilliant. I mean, that was him. I must say, I heard the Breakfast Time music from back in the 80s earlier on this morning. It still brings butterflies to my stomach. When we started that, it was turmoil. It was frenetic. And it was Frank who really brought it all together. We had, the whole thing was the creation of a brilliant producer called Ron Neal. But the king of it, the person who really made it work so much, was Frank. He had so much more experience than the rest of us. And just before we went on air, with 2.5, 3 hours, largely unscripted, well, you could hear panic in your ear from the gallery. We were all with jitters on the floor, and Frank went. He clapped his hands, said, "Calm down, everybody. It's going to be fine," and it was.
Let's also talk to you, Esther Rantzen, because you worked him as well, didn't you? Briefly on Breakfast Time. Unflappable, was he?
He certainly seemed that way, and in your excellent package, you described him as the nation's uncle, and I think that was the sort of reliability, the cardigans up to that point. All BBC presenters had shirts and ties and were very formal, sitting behind desks. Suddenly, people were relaxed on the sofa. It was a lovely atmosphere. And in charge of it all was Uncle Frank. And I think that's what made the appalling expose done on him so shocking. And I think these days he would have been able to climb back. I'm sure he would have. It seems a very draconian punishment to destroy not just the career of a man, but his public identity. And it must have cost him, well, everything, really. I'm very sad to think of him dying like that when we have such happy memories of him.
Nick, Esther makes a really interesting point there, because, you know, he was this sort of had that clean-cut image, didn't he? And then the revelations came out. And I think right until, you know, his most recent interviews, he didn't give many, but he would be concerned that people would remember those headlines that Esther was talking about rather than that really successful career that he had. Of course, that was his overwhelming concern in later years. He had this glittering career, and he was enormous fun. Esther says he had a twinkle in his eye. I'm afraid he did in more ways than one. But frankly, for most of us on Breakfast Time, I think for all of us, it was one of the happiest times of our lives. It was a brilliantly happy team. He really led it in so many ways. He had so much more experience than the rest of us. He'd started in the north of England, I think in Newcastle, local TV. I'd started in the north of Ireland, in Belfast. But he had 15 years on me with fantastic experience through sports television. And if you think of now, everybody makes television. I mean, you know, we all take our mobile phone and we all can upload things to YouTube. But this was something special for us. It was 2.5 hours, as I say, of 3 hours of live TV, maybe 20, 30 live feeds coming in during the morning, 20 or 30 guests. Heaven knows what was going on. People talking in your ear. He just, if anything went wrong, you felt completely safe in his hands. He was a genius at television.
Let's also talk about the jumpers, because I understand that was his idea, was it?
No, it was, well,
was it yours?
History is bunk, isn't it? What happened is the first time we turned up, I used to do news and current affairs, and I turned up with a tie, as one did in those days. He was an open neck shirt. So, you know, it's very, very much his show. There were 3 presenters, but it was very much Frank's show. So the next rehearsal, I came in open neck shirt and he wore a tie. And the next time he came in a jumper, and I said, Frank, you know, what are we going to wear for this thing? And it really, it emerged, it evolved. It wasn't a formal decision, let alone one made by the bosses. But it felt absolutely right for the time. It felt absolutely right for Ron Neal's idea of this relaxed show where the viewers were being invited into our breakfast and we should be there as we would have been at home.
Yeah, we were able to speak to Ron Neal a couple of hours ago about his memories of Frank Bough as well. And Esther, Nick talks about Frank Bough there being a sort of really reliable presenter. I suppose there aren't many people nowadays who work across so many different genres as he did.
Well, it was a big jump for him, actually, to go from sport to Nationwide. I remember that because I was working on Nationwide from time to time, and he came in to join Mike Barrett as the lead presenter, having done sports reporting up to then. But he had a very quick intelligence. He could pick up interviews and work with them as well as anyone with a current affairs background. And I think he was very versatile. You know, they talk about sex, drugs and rock and roll. And I think the problem with Frank was that the public didn't know about the sex and drugs. And also, he didn't involve himself in rock and roll. He was a current affairs presenter, and that was it. I think if he'd been exposed that way and he'd been in other industries in the entertainment world, he might have been forgiven and brought back into the fold. And I think his talent deserved it.
Nick, what would be your fondest memory of him, do you think?
Well, I think in that first week, it was the ease with which he segued us from one thing into another. I very much remember interviewing the Chancellor of the Exchequer and Frank saying, let's take him across to Glenn Christian, who was doing the cooking. And it was the way that he just seamlessly moved from one thing to the other, as though we weren't on television at home, as though on television in front of 1.5 million, 2 million people, but as though we were just at home. That was his genius. I've got really very, very fond memories of Frank. I'm so sorry to hear that he's died.
Oh, well, thank you so much to both of you for sharing those wonderful memories today. That's Nick Ross and Dame Esther Rantzen live with us this morning on Breakfast, remembering their former colleague Frank Bough.
Thank you both very much indeed. And we're going to talk to Carol right now. She's at Arundel Castle for us this morning.
It's hard to say Arundel Castle.
Arundel Castle. And you knew him as well, didn't you, Carol?
That's right, Lou. Yes, in 1983 I came down to work for the BBC when I was a student as a production secretary, and Frank was very much in the forefront of the programme, and he was so kind to me. I was hopeless and he was always so accommodating, and he had a summer party for the staff as well in his house every summer, I believe. I went to that one. Just a lovely man, and our sincerest condolences to all his family.